Aristotle, born in 384 in Stagira, Greece, a prominent and influential philosopher of the ancient times. A man of profound insights and innovative ideas that of course have had a lasting impact on various disciplines like metaphysics, ethics, science, and logic. A student of Plato and a tutor to Alexander the Great, such a broad intellectual scope, including nearly all of the subjects, at least known during his time. But in contrast to his instructor Plato, who emphasized ideal forms, Aristotle based his philosophy on actual observations, establishing the foundation for a methodical approach to acquiring knowledge and comprehending the universe. Welcome to the channel, everyone. Back to ancient Greece today. As always, you're supporting the channel simply by enjoying it, and I hope that you are. And for those newcomers, I'd like to wish you a very enthusiastic welcome. Those coming back, good to see you again. Now, without further ado, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and let's get on with the video. Nice and slow. Well, unfortunately, and off to a great start, I suppose, we can't really start the video with specific aspects of Aristotle's early life. They're not really well established. I suppose that's just the nature of the beast when you're studying figures that are this old. We do have a few things from ancient biographies, but they frequently contain conjecture, and historians, ancient and modern, only really concur on a limited number of significant details. Now, I know that's not the usual way to start a video, but, well, it's the general warning that we sort of give when we have to go back several thousands of years. So with that in mind, let's continue in a more formal sense. Now, as I mentioned, that he was born in 384 BC in Stagira, which was approximately 55 kilometers or 34 miles to the east of present-day Thessaloniki. Nichomachus, his father, held the esteemed position of personal physician to King Amyntas of Macedon, so certainly not a bad position at all. As for Aristotle, during his youth, he seems to have acquired knowledge in the fields of biology and medicine, receiving instruction from his father, who was, of course, well versed in these. Of course, you had to be if you were the physician to the king. Well, as for his parents, they both passed away when he was approximately 13 years old, and not to be left alone to his own devices, Proxenus of Aternius assumed the role as his guardian. Now, there's limited details of this time that have been preserved, but we do know, or at least think that it's likely, that he had some exposure to the Macedonian palace, where he established his initial ties with the Macedonian royalty. During his late teenage years, Aristotle relocated to Athens in order to pursue further education in Plato's academy. Of course, the place to be for anyone who was a thinker in the old Greek world. It's likely that he participated in the Eleusinian mysteries, as he mentioned in his writing that to experience is to learn, while describing the sights witnessed during the mysteries themselves. If you want a little bit more about that, I have a bit of an older video on it. I should probably do a new one. Wait for that soon. Now, he resided at Athens for around 20 or so years, before departing in 348 or perhaps 47 BC. The conventional narrative of his departure suggests that he was dissatisfied with the path that the Academy took under the leadership of Plato's nephew, Zeuxippus. However, it is also plausible that he departed due to concerns about the prevailing anti-Macedonian attitudes in Athens at that particular time. Possibly, he might have departed even before Plato's demise. Now, it's all about politics, I'm afraid. Well, subsequently, he followed Xenocrates to the court of Hermias of Aternius, who was a close acquaintance in Asia Minor. Now, following the death of Hermias, Aristotle and his student Theophrastus embarked on a journey to the island of Lesbos. During their time there, they conducted extensive studies on the island's flora and fauna, particularly focusing on its protected lagoon. During his time in Lesbos, Aristotle entered into matrimony with Pythias, who was possibly the adopted daughter of Hermias, or perhaps her niece. And, in fact, they even had a little daughter of their own, whom they also called Pythias. Now, around this time, Aristotle received an invitation from Philip II of Macedon in 343 BC to serve as the tutor for his son, Alexander. That is indeed Alexander the Great. So Aristotle was designated as the leader of the prestigious Royal Academy of Macedon, which you can imagine would be quite a prestigious position, under the watch of the king himself, and invitation. Well, while he was serving in the Macedonian court, he provided instruction not only to Alexander, but also to two other prospective monarchs, that being Ptolemy and Cassander. Well, Aristotle urged Alexander to pursue conquests in the east, and Aristotle's own perspective on Persia was openly ethnocentric. In fact, he advises Alexander to be a sovereign to the Greeks and a tyrant to the barbarians, treating the former with care and concern like friends and family, and handing the latter as if they were animals or plants. His words. Well, in 335, he came back to Athens, and he founded his own educational institution called the Lyceum. Thus he taught classes at the school for the following 12 years. During his time in Athens, Aristotle's wife Pythias passed away, and he entered into a relationship with Herpylus of Stagira. Aristotle named his next son after his father, Nichomachus. If the Suda, which was a compilation from the medieval ages that lacks critical analysis, is reliable, it seems that he may have had a Eromenos named Paleophatus of Abydos. Now, during the period in Athens, from 335 to 320 BC, it's thought that Aristotle had written several of his works. He composed numerous dialogues, but only partial remnants have survived, which is pretty unfortunate. But, well, you do what you can. The surviving works are primarily in the form of treatises, and were not originally intended for widespread dissemination. But they were, so too bad. Now, they are commonly believed to have served as instructional materials for his students. The most significant treatises comprise physics, metaphysics, Nicomachean Ethics, Politics, On the Soul, and Poetics. Aristotle extensively researched and achieved substantial advancements in various fields, including logic, mathematics, biology, botany, ethics, agriculture, medicine, and even dance and theatre. During the final stages of his life, Alexander and Aristotle seem to have grown distant, and this was mainly because Alexander had this close association with Persia and the Persians. And by the way, it wasn't only Aristotle who had quite a few reservations about this. People were quite annoyed when Alexander began to dress like a Persian. After all, he's meant to be a Macedonian king. He was meant to conquer the Persians, not become one. Well, that's a topic for another video, I suppose. Now, there is a common belief, by the way, in ancient times, that Aristotle may have been involved in the killing of Alexander. However, there isn't too much evidence supporting this. It's highly improbable, and it was a statement that was made 6 years after Alexander's death, most likely by someone who simply wanted to smear the name of Aristotle. Now, after the death of Alexander, there was a resurgence of anti-Macedonian feeling in Athens. In 322, Demophilus and Eumeton, the Hierophant, publicly accused Aristotle of impiety, causing him to escape to his mother's ancestral property in Chalcis, which is located on the island of Euboea. Now, it was during this time that he allegedly declared, "I will not permit the Athenians to commit a second offense against philosophy." This is referring to the trial and execution of Socrates in Athens, where he was forced to drink the hemlock. And so Aristotle passed away in Chalcis, Euboea. He died from natural causes at the age of 62, and appointed his student Antipater as his main executor on the will, and in the will he requested that he was buried next to his wife. Terribly romantic. Now, that is the life of Aristotle, as we know about it, as much as we really can. But really, it's the works and writings of Aristotle that really endure. So, I suppose this is part 2 of the video, where we talk about all of the little things that Aristotle is known for. So buckle up, buckaroo. Let's get busy. Now, he's recognized as the pioneer of formal logic through his work, titled The Prior Analytics. His understanding of formal logic remained the prevailing form, at least in terms of Western logic, until the 19th century, when advancements in mathematical logic began to emerge. And with that, of course, we have Immanuel Kant, who in his Critique of Pure Reason asserted that logic achieved its ultimate development with Aristotle. And that's quite a legacy. You can't beat it. Now, it's highly probable that the majority of Aristotle's work simply does not exist in its original form. Well, it likely underwent editing by his students and subsequent instructors, which is pretty normal. Chinese whispers, Aristotle's logical writings were consolidated into a collection of 6 books, known as the Organon, approximately 40 BC, by Andronicus of Rhodes, or perhaps his disciples. Now, these books are Categories, On Interpretation, Prior Analytics, Posterior Analytics, Topics, and finally, On Sophistical Refutations. All very interesting topics, I'm sure. Now, the precise order of the books, or the lessons from which they were composed, well, that is a little uncertain. However, this list was derived following a meticulous review of Aristotle's writings. The progression begins with an examination of fundamental concepts in the categories, followed by an analysis of propositions and their basic connections in the work On Interpretation, then advancing to the investigation of more intricate structures, specifically syllogisms in the analytics and dialectics in the topics and sophistical refutations. The initial 3 treatises constitute the fundamental components of the logical theory in its strictest sense, the grammar of the logical language, and the accurate principles of reasoning. Although not typically mentioned, the work entitled Rhetoric is dependent on the topics, according to its content. Aristotle would have referred to what is now known as Aristotelian logic, with its several varieties of syllogism, as analytics. In fact, the term logic is exclusively used to refer to dialectics. Now, under the term metaphysics, which no doubt you've heard of, well, that seems to have been introduced by the editor of Aristotle's works in the 1st century AD, so a few hundred years after, who compiled several excerpts into the book which is now known as Metaphysics. Aristotle referred to it as first philosophy, and separated it from mathematics and natural science, or physics, as contemplative philosophy, that is, theological, and focuses on the study of the divine. And in his work, Metaphysics, he penned the following statement, and I quote, "If there were no other independent things besides the composite natural ones, the study of nature would be the primary kind of knowledge. But if there is some motionless independent thing, the knowledge of this precedes it, and is first philosophy, and it is universal in just this way, because it is first, and it belongs to this sort of philosophy to study being as being, both what it is and what belongs to it, just by virtue of being." End of the work from Metaphysics, or rather the quote from the work Metaphysics. Now, speaking a little bit more about this work in particular, and specifically Book 7, Aristotle explores the notions of substance, or in Greek, ousia, and essence, that is, the what it was to be. He ultimately suggests that a specific substance is a composite of both matter and form, a philosophical doctrine known as hylomorphism. Now, in the following book, that being Book 8 of Metaphysics, he differentiates the substance's matter as the substratum, which refers to the material from which it was made. Now, for instance, and just a bit of an example, the matter of a home refers to the physical components that it's made of. So we're talking the bricks and the stones, the foundation, and all the timber that make up the potential of the house. But, on the other hand, the form of the substance refers to the actual house itself, which includes features like a covering for bodies and chattels, and any other distinguishing characteristics that allow us to classify something as the completed form of a house. Are you following? You understand? I know it's hard to follow sometimes, but we're doing our best. Let's bravely continue on, shall we? Now, the formula that determines the components is the account of the substance, whereas the formula that determines the distinguishing characteristics is the account of the essence. So think about the substance of something and the essence of something. Yeah, I'm tapping my right temple with my index finger as we go through this. Now, similar to his teacher Plato, Aristotle's philosophy is oriented towards the universal. Now, in Aristotle's ontology, the universal, or katholou in Greek, is situated within individual particulars, which are tangible entities in the world. But in terms of Plato, on the other hand, he believes that the universal exists as a distinct form that the real thing strives to replicate. Aristotle considers this form, in quotation marks, to be the fundamental basis of phenomena, and that is all phenomena, although it is specifically manifested in a particular substance. Now back to Plato, because of course we have to understand the teacher of Aristotle, the tree from which the apple fell from, if we want to put it that way. Well, Plato suggests that all entities possess a universal essence, which might manifest as either a characteristic or a connection to other entities. For example, when observing a banana, one perceives its physical presence, but can also scrutinize its shape. So within this differentiation there exists a specific instance of a banana and a general archetype of a banana. Now that's appealing. Furthermore, it is possible to position a banana adjacent to a book, allowing for the description of both objects as being in close proximity to one another. Now, Plato contended that there were certain universal forms that are distinct from individual entities. It is conceivable that there may not be any specific instance of goodness, but the concept of good still holds a valid universal form in general. But Aristotle had a bit of a contrasting view to Plato, contending that all general concepts are manifested at some point in time, and that there are no general concepts that exist independently from actual objects. Furthermore, Aristotle held a contrasting viewpoint to Plato regarding the placement of universals. You see, while Plato argued that the forms exist independently from the objects that embody them, Aristotle believed that the universals are inherent in each individual object that possesses these universals. In fact, according to Aristotle, the essence or nature of a banana resides within each individual one, rather than in the separate realm of ideal forms. Now think about this. These are conversations people were having 2,500 years ago. It's incredible that people were thinking about this sort of thing back then. Absolutely marvelous. If that doesn't get you excited, just go watch some Minecraft videos or something. I don't know what to tell you. Now, it's not all so dry. Of course, there's practical philosophy too. And Aristotle was certainly, as much as anybody else, looking into that, just as relevant and, dare say, just as complicated. Or perhaps it's incredibly simple. Maybe it's a bit of both. Now, in terms of the practical philosophy, we're talking things like economics, ethics, politics, and rhetoric. And Aristotle views ethics as a practical inquiry focused on moral excellence and virtuous action, rather than this collection of abstract knowledge. And I tend to agree with him. Now, the most significant work on ethics is, of course, the Nichomachean ethics, which suggests that virtue is closely tied to the proper functioning of an entity, the ergon. For example, a pretty bare bones one, the virtue of the hand lies in its ability to touch, which is its primary function. The virtue of the lungs lies in their ability to breathe, the tongue to taste, the eyes to see, the ears to hear. And similarly, Aristotle argues that humans in general have a unique function related to the soul's activity in accordance with reason. Now, the ideal state of the soul, or virtue, is the golden mean, a balanced state between excess and deficiency, which leads to eudaimonia, the ultimate goal of human life, which is often translated to happiness or well-being. Achieving this state requires a virtuous character, referred to as moral or ethical virtue, which is essential for true happiness. Now, a long time ago, I come across this concept of the aforementioned eudaimonia versus the hedonia, kind of the yin and yang of happiness. I suppose we can boil it down to these two things. There's a good happiness and a bad happiness. And let me explain. What we have on one hand is eudaimonia, which is kind of the long happiness. So you think about things like working on a project. If you buy some old car, you know it's going to take you months to fix the thing up. But there's a virtue in that. There's a sense of achievement. There's a kind of happiness that lasts a long time. The happiness of having children of your own and watching them grow up. The happiness of writing a book and finishing it and seeing other people enjoy it. Or, in my case, it is that long-term eudaimonic happiness of creating something right here on YouTube that seems that quite a great many people enjoy. Now that is eudaimonic happiness. But then on the other hand, there's hedonia, this hedonic happiness. Now we all know about hedonism, but don't think about it strictly in a sexual sense. Think about it in a sense of short-term gratifications. A hedonic happiness is, I want to feel good, so I'll drink a can of Coca-Cola, or I'll sit on the couch and eat a pizza and watch a funny movie, or I'll play a video game, that sort of thing. There's not anything that's inherently wrong with it. Of course, everything in moderation. However, this is not long-term sustainable happiness. Sometimes it's okay to sit on the couch, eat a pizza, and watch a movie, that's fine. But if you're doing that every night, if you're doing that to such an extent that your happiness is hinging upon it, these short-term bursts, well then you're going to end up having a life that isn't very virtuous. and you're going to end up feeling unfulfilled. There's nothing left at the end of the day for you to look at. Once the screen turns off, it's all gone. Same as the video game. That character evaporates into thin air. Gone forever. You may go back into that virtual world and feel like a hero to get that hedonic shot of happiness. That modern version of our soma, like they described in Aldous Huxley's work Brave New World. But, like I said, it's not as fulfilling as this long-term eudaimonia. So, find something that you will be proud of when you complete. Something long-term, a goal to work towards, something to strive for. Go to the gym, write a book, learn a musical instrument, go and travel. Look back on things in 10 years' time. Think of your grandchildren asking you, "What are you doing back when you were my age?" Don't tell them that you were sitting on the couch eating pizza, watching TV. Now anyway, that little rant is over. And back to Aristotle. It's a relevant rant. A short detour. So in terms of Aristotle, he believed that developing virtuous and a potentially joyful character begins with this fortunate exposure to external influences. Now that's such as teachers and life experiences, and all of this comes together to shape a person's habits. This is followed by this conscious choice to engage in morally commendable actions. For individuals of exceptional character, it is this lifestyle that leads to the mutual cultivation of practical wisdom, which in Greek is phronesis, and also intellectual insight, which is also nous, culminating in the highest form of human excellence, this great eudaimonia, and the wisdom of a skilled theoretical thinker, or indeed a philosopher. Now, onto the work of politics, because of course the Greeks, well, you can't have ancient Greece without the politics, can't you? Aristotle extends in this work his exploration of ethics into the realm of the polis, the city. You'll know that a lot of Greek cities end with the word polis. Well, that just means city. It's a suffix on the end. Think about necropolis, the city of the dead, this sort of thing. Acropolis, those places. Now, Aristotle views the city as a natural and organic community, which is greater in significance than the family, and the family as more important than the individual, asserting that, in his words, the whole must inevitably come before the part. He famously stated that man is by nature a political animal, and he argued that humanity's unique capacity for rationality distinguishes it from other species. So, he conceptualizes politics as a living organism with interdependent parts that cannot exist on their own, offering this holistic understanding of this city as an entity. He is thus seen as one of the first thinkers to approach the city as a complex, interconnected entity, and do remember that cities in general, they were kind of a new idea, especially back in those days. Most people were, well, in smaller kind of communities, gathering around river mouths and all the rest, or indeed nomads wandering around, depending what part of the world you're in. Of course, you go over to China, and well, China, India, places like that, cities weren't exactly a new concept. But, well, get back to the point. Now, in a work entitled Protrepticus, there is a fictional persona named Aristotle, and he expresses the following. For we all agree that the most excellent man should rule, the supreme by nature, and that the law rules above and alone is authoritative. But the law is a kind of intelligence, i.e. a discourse based on intelligence. And again, what standard do we have? What criterion of good things that is more precise than the intelligent man? For all that this man will choose, if the choice is based on knowledge, are good things and their contraries bad. And since everybody chooses most of all what conforms to their own proper dispositions, a just man choosing to live justly, a man with bravery to live bravery, likewise a self-controlled man to live with self-control, it is clear that the intelligent man will choose most of all to be intelligent, for this is the function of that capacity. Hence it is evident that according to the most authoritative judgment, intelligence is supreme among goods. Of course, Aristotle also, as a pupil of Plato, expressed this strong criticism towards democracy. That's right. It wasn't popular among everybody. Of course, that is the nature of democracy. People get to choose. The problem is when they choose something other than democracy. Oh, and I will mention too, the democracy of the ancient Greeks is quite different to the democracy that we imagine in our modern sense. So, don't think it's the same thing. It is, perhaps, in essence, but the sum of its parts, well, it just doesn't really add up to a picture that we recognize in a modern sense, especially in terms of how things functioned in ancient Greece. Well, drawing inspiration from Plato's statesmen, Aristotle constructed a comprehensive system that aimed to combine different types of power in what he referred to as a mixed state. And he talks about this in Book 4 of Politics. I'll quickly just read that. And he quotes from the book, "It is constitutional to take from oligarchy that officers are to be elected, and from democracy that this is not to be on property qualification. This, then, is the mode of the mixture. And the mark of a good mixture of democracy and oligarchy is when it is possible to speak of the same constitution as democracy and as an oligarchy." End of the passage from Politics. Of course, with politics comes money, and Aristotle made significant contributions of his own to economic thinking, which were particularly influential when they were dredged up in the Middle Ages. Now he explored the concepts of the city, property, and trade, offering insights that foreshadowed later advocates of private property. In fact, he argued that while communal arrangements might seem beneficial, and private property is often blamed for social conflict, these issues actually stem from human nature in general, rather than the institution of private property itself. Aristotle also provided an early explanation of the origin of money, asserting that it emerged from the interdependence of individuals who needed to trade goods simply to survive. As people began to rely on each other for importing necessities and exporting surpluses, they simply agreed to use commodities that had inherent value. Think about it. Things that everybody needs, iron, silver, things like this, being used as a medium for exchange, as pure convenience. Now, Aristotle's views on commerce and usury, that is, lending money at interest, had a significant impact on the economic thoughts of later medieval times. In fact, Aristotle criticized retail trade, believing that it prioritized profit over the natural use of goods, which he considered a deviation from normal economic activity. He also condemned earning profit through interest, viewing it as unnatural because it involves making money from money itself rather than from its use. Of course, Aristotle's understanding of money was really quite remarkable for his time. He argued that money is necessary as a universal measure to compare the value of different goods, thus facilitating trade, and that it also serves as a means for future exchange, acting as a form of security that allows people to acquire what they need later, even if they don't need it immediately. Now, in the work Rhetoric, Aristotle identifies 3 fundamental types of arguments a speaker can use to persuade an audience. Now, the first one is ethos, which is an appeal to the speaker's character, followed by pathos, appeal to the audience's emotions, and logos, the appeal to logical reasoning. He also categorizes rhetoric into 3 genres, that is, epideictic, the ceremonial speeches that praise or condemn, forensic, judicial speeches concerning guilt or innocence, and deliberative, speeches aimed at persuading an audience to make a decision on a specific issue. He further divides rhetorical proofs into 2 types, which is enthymeme, based on syllogistic reasoning, and paradeima, based on the use of examples. These classifications and analysis laid the foundation for the study of rhetoric, influencing both ancient and modern discourse, especially in medieval times. That was the main subject. Of course, people don't really get taught how to speak properly anymore, and we're suffering for it. You ever watch movies from the 1940s and 50s, to a lesser extent the 60s, but you hear how people talk, how they communicate with one another. Things just aren't the same anymore, aren't they? Well, in his Poetics, Aristotle argues that various art forms, that includes epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, painting, sculpture, music, dance, well, they're all forms of mimesis, or imitation. That is, of course, where we get our word mime from, in that French sense, where they imitate different things. No doubt you know what a mime is. Now, each art form differs in its medium, object, and technique of imitation. The term mimesis describes both a characteristic of a work of art and the outcome of the artist's intent. Aristotle emphasizes that the audience's recognition of mimesis is crucial for understanding the artwork itself, both the form and the substance. He suggests that the process is a natural human inclination, this mimesis, that sets people apart from animals, and that all artistic endeavors reflect the structure of the natural world. Now, onto Poetics. That is thought to have originally consisted of 2 books, one on comedy and the other on tragedy. But unfortunately, at least as of 2024, only the section on tragedy has survived. That doesn't mean we're not going to find it later on, that section on comedy. Who knows? We can't write it off. Now, Aristotle, in the surviving sections, identified 6 essential elements of tragedy. That is, plot structure, character, style, thought, spectacle, and lyric poetry. He argued that in tragedy, characters serve to advance the plot, which is of course the central focus of everything, and that tragedy imitates events that evoke pity and fear, with the goal of purging or purifying these emotions, a process known as catharsis, drawing them up and exposing them to the light. Now, Aristotle concludes the surviving works of poetics with a discussion of whether epic or tragic mimesis is superior. And he suggests that tragedy, which contains all the elements of an epic but also includes features like spectacle and music, is in fact more unified and achieves its mimetic purpose within a shorter time frame, making it potentially, in his opinions, superior to epic poetry. Aristotle also showed a keen interest in collecting riddles, folklore, and proverbs systematically. He and his school were particularly fascinated by the riddles of the Delphic oracle, and had a grand old time studying Aesop's fables rather extensively. Now, here's another thing. Aristotle also held the argument that men were inherently superior to women, just by virtue of being men. And he stated in one of his works, the male is naturally superior, and the female inferior. The male is the ruler, the female is the subject. Of course, a lot of people are not too happy about hearing this sort of thing. But we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because somebody has one bad opinion, or, indeed, only the bad opinions are bad because you disagree with them, you can't just throw everything out that they say. So this isn't some kind of, I don't know, hashtag cancel Aristotle sort of thing, but it's something that we do have to mention. Now, it's a viewpoint that has drawn significant criticism from, well, modern metaphysicians who accuse Aristotle of misogyny and sexism, but I don't think we're really going to go down that route. And either way, despite all these views, Aristotle did acknowledge the importance of women's pleasure, equating it of that to men, and in his rhetoric he stated that factors contributing to happiness should be present in both genders. Additionally, just like other Greek philosophers, such as Plato and Xenophon, Aristotle opposed homosexuality, believing it could lead to moral corruption, as it was contrary to the natural order of things. Well, of course, Aristotle's achievements in general include founding formal logic, pioneering the study of zoology, and significantly contributing to the development of the scientific method, a foundation for all subsequent scientists and philosophers. It's been suggested that Aristotle's establishment of 2 distinct fields of study indeed were a singular accomplishment, with his influence extending across various domains, such as Western ethical and political philosophy, theology, rhetoric, and literary analysis. Any examination of contemporary reality inevitably contains some elements from Aristotelian philosophies, including its profound intellectual influence. Now, that is not to say that we owe absolutely everything to Aristotelian thought, but we certainly owe quite a lot to it. And perhaps things might have looked a little bit different if not for his contributions. Now, speaking of contributions, and as we get to the end of the video, wow, what a segue! I would like to read off the contributions of my top-tier supporters, that is on the Patreon and the YouTube memberships. So there's Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, and Wendy. Thank you very much. And if you would like to become a supporter, well, you know what to do. I don't have to spell it out for you. And with that, we reach the end of our video on Aristotle. I'll give you a little bit of homework. I know I don't usually give you homework, but just do think about that section where I talked about eudaimonia and hedonia, that short-term and long-term happiness. Try to think of a few eudaimonic things that you could have in your life, and try and think of a few hedonic behaviors that you could perhaps not get rid of, but dial back a little bit. After all, we're all human beings. Good night, everyone. Lots of love to you all, and I'll see you tomorrow.